video on the pumpkin spice deal.
Uh-huh.
The guys were washing boxes out there, and it was kind of chilly. And was out there with his shirt off and swimming trunks.
Yep.
And Randy is out there with a coat, a sweater, and a rain jacket. And she goes, "There's two types of people: those that like summer," and shows the kid in the swimming trunks here outside,
Yep.
and then those that like pumpkin spice lattes. And it showed Randy, and I thought
Now,
that was pretty funny there.
to be clear, mine is just pumpkin spice black coffee. It's not a
It's a
damn
latte.
latte.
That's a good point. No, I appreciate that. So, welcome back to the Cornelia Seed Podcast. I'm Juan, Innovation Lead here at Cornelia Seed, and I'm excited to dive into today's topic. As always, I'm joined by Craig Allaman, our lead agronomist, and in this episode, we're going to take a deep look into that importance of pausing and measuring and counting during harvest. Craig shares some key insights on the need for adjusting some combine settings and reducing head shatter loss, and also just really making the most out of those crucial harvest windows. So, whether it's managing moisture levels in soybeans or tackling corn standability challenges, we've got some good practical advice for you. And then we'll also dive into some questions that came in from the field overnight. So, without further ado, welcome, Craig.
How we doing, Juan?
Not too shabby. Appreciate you being available. Well, actually, I appreciate Mother Nature making you available this morning.
Yeah,
Um,
we had about 1.8 inches of rain down here in western Illinois overnight.
are you Knox County or are you Warren
Warren
County?
County. Warren County,
That's
next
right.
one west of Knox. Yeah.
I didn't see the radar. Was there a big swath of coverage there, or was
It
it
re it
just
it really north to south really wasn't that wide. They were calling for it when I went to bed, and I didn't see anything on the radar out west, so I had no idea where it was gonna come from, but one of the rare occasions that the weather forecasters were actually correct, because we definitely got a pretty good system, and it had some heavy stuff in it.
it's a good segue to I mentioned we're going to talk about the pause measure count, but really, some of the questions that have been coming in and were around harvesting beans, and a lot of the beans in our neck of the woods. Well, at least I come up from Scott County, Iowa, in the Quad Cities, up to Jackson County here at the home office, and I heard about 9% beans here just 2 or 3 days ago, and then some back at home near me, and I think maybe even you. And one of the one of the questions that came in from Mark Grossgroger, our local DSM, get that pulled up here, was he had some folks wondering if losing a lot of moisture weight, are you losing a lot of moisture weight harvesting at 8 or 9%, or should a guy wait for rain? And you said something perfect earlier, was you didn't know where the weatherman was pulling it from, but you're glad it came. So what are your thoughts around that?
Well, that's everybody. There's a lot of different thoughts on that, and everybody has to do what they think's best for their operation. Ideally, you would want to take them out at 13% and have the full amount of allowable moisture in there where you're not paying for drying, because we get paid on weight at the elevator. We don't get paid on the volume of bushels. It's determined by the weight. So the more water in there, the more weight, and the less water, the less weight, obviously. But if you wait for the perfect conditions, if they get too dry and you wait till you get a rain to get back in there, at some point the calendar is the bigger determining factor there, especially further north you go in the Corn Belt, because your winter's going to set in quicker and those beans need to get out. So again, then that's where it comes down to personal decision. We were in 9% beans yesterday, and not 9.5, 9, but this is a great window for us to get them out, and we really haven't done much on corn yet. And you don't want to leave that out there forever ever either, just for standability reasons. So we made the decision that even though they're 9.5%, they're coming out, in this window that we have. Now this rain will bring them back up into the mid to upper teens, and then next time we get the opportunity to finish up on beans, we've got 20 acres left in the field we were in, and then a 32-acre field on up the road that we'll get to when we move up there for corn. So we'll get them out probably at pretty decent moisture, but I'm not I'm not. It's just part of farming. You're not going to take them out at a perfect condition and perfect moisture level.
Okay. All right. No, well, thank you for that. We'll circle back on beans again a little bit later as it relates to some disease that we've some of the guys that we're seeing, but I'll table that for the second half of this. We don't have to dig in too deep to the pause measure count concept. Our idea behind this is just, hey, let's be aware and let's make sure we're going back and that we're checking that things are well adjusted because you know leaving too much seed on the in the field or getting lost at the head can translate to real dollars. But what are your thoughts around this and why is it important that we're talking about this right now as guys are either taking a break or rained out or maybe, the crop is still healthy and not ready to be taken out yet.
Well, you think about it, we spend the whole year and a lot of money and a lot of time and investment into this crop. And so when we get to the harvest time frame, we want to get as many bushels out of those fields as we can. So it's just important to take that extra time to make sure your settings are all right. Make those decisions as to when you're going to get in there and harvest, like we just got done talking on soybeans. It doesn't necessarily, when we pause and check things out, doesn't necessarily mean we have to physically get out and check things. We can do that with a combine. We can look and see behind the machine, pull back the residue and see how many beans or how many kernels of corn that we've got on the ground after the combine has went through. Some of that's passing through the combine. Some of it is shatter at the head. To determine shatter at the head, we'd go along and harvest and we stop and back up and then check that ground that the combine hasn't passed over yet, that just the head is passed over. And that's where we see the difference between head shatter and passing through the machine. The cool thing about these modern machines is they have sensors. There's sensors at the cylinder where we're doing the threshing and on the returns, and then also coming out the back over the sieves. So these sensors are very great tools for us. We're monitoring them as we go through the field with the combine, and then we can make adjustments right there on our digital screen if we think we need to on those different input items. So that's a lot of times it's just taking the time when you get started to look at those funnels, to look at those. We ours looks like a funnel, and when it gets out of green into yellow and then into red, that's when we know we need to make some adjustments. And every modern combine's going to have some form of that. And it's just a great tool. We can see that right from the machine. I'm fortunate. My oldest boy that farms full time, he spent a couple of years on the wheat harvest and with the team from John Deere that goes around and fixes machines and the engineers come out and ride with them and looking at the new prototypes and things like that. So he's very knowledgeable with that. And he'll sometimes look, he maybe be running the auger cart or the semi and he'll look behind the combine as I'm going and give me suggestions for what I need to do on adjustments as well. So it's kind of a team effort there. That's maybe the combine's not pausing, but the guy in the auger cart is helping out, looking out. But yeah, that's a lot of that is just make sure those settings are correct, and we've got a lot of help with this modern machinery that tells us a lot of that.
Well, no, and that makes sense, there when I hear you saying that, I think about whether folks that are hopping in and either new to machines, it's important to get intimate or familiarized with everything that's going on the screen, right? And it sounds like, there's a lot of tools in there already, and it's just a matter of using them. It also sounds like there might be a little possibility where you might not get some of the data, and that's like that low moisture corn that's shattering at the head, but you give that good tip of backing up a little bit and take a look at it before the combine goes over it. When we talk about shatter at the head, what is there what types of things would your son say, "Hey, we've got a lot of shatter happening up there. We need to do XYZ to take care of
Yeah,
this."
well, yeah, and that's another. You get into the equipment issue and improvements or things that need to be improved. On the bean platform, yeah, the shatter at the head, that's an example there. Going back to equipment and improvements we've had in equipment over time, or improvements that still need to take place. And, we talked about the soybeans earlier there. The draper heads have been a huge improvement there. You back from when we cut the beans off with a sickle, Rio brings them in, and then that metal auger is bringing them to the center, and that metal auger was very aggressive, and that's where you get a lot of beans popping out of the pods, hitting the window on the combine, and ultimately getting out of the platform before they get in the combine. And the draper, of course, instead of that metal auger that coming across there, beans are just laying down on rubber mats that bring it into the center, and then a rubber mat brings it into the feeder house there. So, the shatter loss on soybeans just greatly reduced with the draper head. So that's an amazing technology. On the flip side there, though, with corn, we're the head's pulling that corn straight down, and those ears are gonna smack on just bare metal, the stripper plates there. So that's a tech. I wish there was a way that that technology, is not as aggressive doing that, and we would have less shatter at the head. But shatter at the head is worse as the corn gets drier, because naturally, as the kernels shrink, they're easier. I mean, you take an ear that's 15% moisture versus one that's 25 and try to shell them off, and it shells off a lot easier with the dry corn. So as that dry corn hits that metal on the corn head, that some of that's going to shatter off of the cob, and we're not going to get all that into the combine. So studies show, most recent studies, the PTI farm I know has one we looked at this summer, precision, and they're showing it somewhere around that 22-23% moisture, anyway from at least that range of 20 to 25 is your most profitable time to harvest, because even though you're paying some extra for drying charges, you're getting that back by not having that shatter loss at the head. So that's a decision with corn that we can make pretty easily to get in there, at least start when we're in that range. By the time, depending on how many acres you have, by the time you get done, you're going to be down to that 14 to 18% moisture anyway. That's just a fact of life. But at least getting started, in that range where we're the most profitable.
Okay. Oh, well, thank you for covering that, because that actually, as I'm looking down here, that was one of the things that came in from Luke Davis, and it was just, those ideal moisture levels. So I appreciate that. And earlier, whenever you were talking about the bean that just lost over with the harvesting beans or dry beans, one of the comments that actually just popped up from Denny Keneally, who's our, I guess, the 4-star regional sales manager out on the west side of the state, bordering up Nebraska. He talked about some of the things he tells his customers is to watch for the reel speed on the bean head, and don't run it too fast, because you can also have some reel loss, and then shatter loss. He talks about folks taking a look at any of the worn sickles or guards that are worn down. Maybe even simple things like sickle hold downs not being adjusted properly, and even looking at things like your rotor speed, if you need to slow it down to prevent flip beans. The point of all that is, we can almost have too much information overload, right? But I think our goal, not I think, what I know our goal is, until the folks listening, is just take a moment to pause, whether it's mentally or physically, and measure what's going on, and kind of count to see what, is this above average loss? Am I losing too much? Do I need to make any adjustments? So that was any more thoughts to you on as it relates to the um, harvesting, and well, would you call this what some folks are talking about, phantom yield loss? I mean, I know you hear that every year, and it's almost a buzzword like other things, right? But it's
Yeah, the phantom yield loss, that's been a topic for years and years. And a farmer, even before all this technology that we have with yield monitors and everything, maybe he did half of a field at 22% moisture and pulled off to do, maybe to do beans or something, and comes back a few weeks later when his moisture's down to 15%, and the yield goes down. So there's been a school of thought, well, is that natural dry down in the field is not as high yielding as if you dry it as a dryer, or just get shrink at the elevator or whatever you're comparing that to. And I don't think those studies have ever, I mean, they're just conflicting. Some studies show yes, some studies show no, but I think it's pretty easy to understand that if I have a lot of shatter loss at 15% corn versus not very much at 22, that maybe the phantom yield loss is not so phantom after all. It's probably just laying right there on the ground. So I think that's definitely part of it.
Well, no, that makes sense. And I have another comment that just popped up here.
Are we live? We have these comments popping up. I didn't know we
It's
were
pretty cool,
live on
right? It's
this.
called a
Right?
super chat, so you guys can check
Oh
us out on
man.
YouTube too. Yeah, Tom. So Tom Jones
You
also
have to
tuned
save
in.
these do you have to save these super chats or they save automatically?
They save auto-magically, actually. It's pretty neat. Tell you what, it's technology
Okay.
has come a long ways, I tell you, from talking through a soup can and string from how you did it back in the day. Uh, Tom Jones mentioned that for him, what they've seen whenever it's been beans going from whether you're taking beans out at 9% or 13%, it translates to 4.5, sometimes 5 bushel difference there an acre, right? So every little bit counts. I mean, this industry and this business, and way of life of farming is not for the weak or the timid. If you're doing it, you're tough. You take risks. Because as we're talking about all these, we can fill up a whole day, and there's like you talked about equipment experts that have looked into all the different ways you can fine tune things to get it just perfect. And you made a comment yesterday that something about how you're never gonna look out the back of that window and see just that it's just absolutely perfect. And it's just about making sure we go through and just take a moment to adjust things that need to if they need it, and keep on rolling. But I don't want to beat a dead horse on that. I think just our goal there is just pause for profit and make sure you protect it and maximize your profits all across the board. Saying that for the marketing folks so they can clip it and be happy. Um, So to the second half of this was now out to the questions that came in. There's folks that have got started. Like I mentioned, the western side of the state has been able to get crop out. I guess it just depends on where you're at, and others that are not. So Rick Brendes brings in from, was it Spencer, Iowa? You know this. You're up there often.
Remsen area.
Remsen area. Okay, yeah. That was, they
Yeah,
had a
not
heck of a year.
they're having yeah, they've got some good crops. I mean, as poor as the crops are out there in a lot of places, they have a garden spot out there. And also within range of the Fireside Restaurant down there in Anton, Iowa, the best prime rib in the world is served.
That's
Just just
fantastic to know.
just a side note.
I hope those folks are listening in. They know that this is not a paid advertisement, but we
No,
will
but
we will
a
take it.
prime rib dinner would be fine.
Absolutely. We're not complaining here. You're here, folks. So, but no, so Rick, when he talks about just seeing disease out there and kind of wonders, what does and doesn't overwinter. Southern rust, Goss's wilt. Can you give us a refresher what if those overwinter or not?
Goss's wilt, yes. Well, and it's Goss's wilt is not a fungus like most of them. It's a bacteria that's going to be present, out there, particularly out there in Nebraska, western Iowa. Will have an outbreak once in a while, maybe southwest Wisconsin and that kind of surrounding area, but that's more of a western disease that we worry about. The rusts have to overwinter in the south, so they're going to be, deep south parts of Texas, along the coast there, Mexico, and then they blow up in storms. So we don't necessarily always have a big rust issue. Now, this year, and I think I made mention at some point early in the summer, whether it was on just to the DSMs or whatever, but they had southern rust up in northwest Missouri pretty early on. So it would have come up and, has to be those storms that come up through the Gulf and bring Gulf moisture up here. They're picking up the rust. If our weather comes in mainly from the west, from coming out of Washington, Oregon type areas, which some years it does. Some years we don't get a lot of Gulf moisture. But if it comes out of the west, it's going to be a real low rust year. But pretty early on, we had southern rust detected out there, and I'm thinking at the time that's going to be a problem because it'll infect the corn that's there and then have another cycle, and then that'll get caught up in a storm and blow on north. So sure enough, we had in southwest Iowa, we started getting hammered there in August and moving on north. Not a lot in eastern Iowa. I mean, there's a little bit, but it's mainly the western half of Iowa, surrounding parts of there that really got it bad.
Okay. Another disease one was around, now hopping over to the soybean side of the world. What kind of impact are we seeing with white mold? And is there any strategies or anything to do about that?
Pretty strong impact where it's gotten, moderately or severe. I think I've seen some plots come in out of Tyler's area there yesterday that, maybe a 20 bushel or better a yield penalty where the white mold was heavy. Um, did seem like a type of year where we would have white mold. The environmental conditions seem right for it. It's going to start infecting the soybeans at the first flower, and actually it doesn't infect until the flower dies. It's infecting the dead material first, splashing up from the soil. But the conditions were pretty good to have white mold. Always been historically a more northern disease. So, the northern half of Iowa, northern Illinois, Wisconsin, more so than down south, but we'll get it down in central Illinois every now and again. I saw a little bit this year. We always have just a little bit, but not a widespread epidemic. I think 2009 was the last year it was really severe down here. But yeah, it does look like, as we thought, it's going to hit some areas pretty decent up in the north. There are strategies for that. I mean, there are some better fungicides. I think Corteva's got one or two than we used to have, but they're kind of you got probably at least a couple applications. You're probably around that R1 stage or that first flowering. And then again, 2-3 weeks later, so there's some expense there. Of course, some soybeans will have better tolerance. It's hard. Problem is the new ones, that's a hard disease to, inoculate and get good ratings on. So sometimes we don't get good ratings on new varieties until we go through a year like this where they've been in the presence of some heavier white mold pressure, and then we can update those ratings. But yeah, those are kind of the main control methods for it.
Okay. Well, thank you. Going over here, making sure there's anything else. Joe Brott out of Wisconsin talked about just late season standability with corn, and interestingly enough, as when he sent that in, just would like for us to touch on it. I was talking to James Cornelius. He was coming into the office, and he mentioned too that, for corn that has been out there and that is mature and ready to be taken out, but for whatever reason haven't been able to get to it. If you get that timely rain, which could be beneficial to your beans to get some moisture back in it, for corn that's ready to go, the stalk can get soft and bend on you. So then it just brought up the standability question. You've said this before about timing, going and assessing your harvest timing. We put out a couple of videos about pushing the stalk and checking and prioritizing. But what are some thoughts you have around that topic as a whole?
Well, one thing I'd say is, in all the genetic tours that we've been across Iowa, Illinois, and Wisconsin over the last 3 weeks or so, I would say stock quality in general is probably a little bit better than I normally see. There's a big swath in northern Illinois and eastern Iowa where, we've had adequate moisture through the year, didn't have that extreme moisture early, fungicide applications. And so there's some pretty healthy crops. So our May 5th planted corn, week ago, well, it'd be, a week and a half ago now, was still at 30% moisture, and normally we would be down into the low 20s by then. So it has stayed really healthy, but those areas that, standability is always a combination of a bunch of things. I mean, starts with the hybrid, make sure it has a good stock quality, especially late in the season, but fertility is a huge one with it, with standability, disease, of course. So when we get into these areas where we were really wet early, definitely has been plenty of nitrogen deficiency. And so when the plant has to rob itself for nitrogen to fill that ear out, that's going to be a problem with the stalk. You wouldn't have expected the root growth to be great in those areas. So just being able to take up, variety of nutrients. And potash or potassium is really key to stalk strength. And so that's going to be an issue anywhere where we've had disease problems. I don't think stock diseases, I don't think this is a huge year. Now, that's a general statement across our corn, across the corn belt, across our footprint. But from what I've seen, I haven't seen an extreme amount of anthracnose and other things, but there'll be local areas where that's not the case. So we could see some stock rot issues. Crown rot probably is one that is fairly heavy this year, just like it was last year. Remember, the causal agent on most of the crown rot is fusarium damage early on, and fusarium sets in wet soils at the seedling stage. So it infects the roots and then moves on up into the crown, eventually completely shutting that crown down and starving that plant. And that's when you get those ghosted plants out there. Other plants are still green, and you got an individual plant that's dead. And so that's a crown rot issue, and that obviously the standability on that's going to be pretty poor. So that's kind of my thoughts on it. There is going to be some standability issues, and if you know your corn was stressed in those areas, those are fields that need to get out early. Across northern Illinois, where we had this year's derecho, some of that started, I know, in eastern Iowa, and then on across Illinois, where those plants were lodged, they need to be, that's when, that 25% moisture gets here. You need to be getting in those fields and getting them out, because they are not going to stand good. They've been damaged in the root and the stalk as well. So that's an easy call there.
Okay. Well, thank you for that. And that's just a matter of prioritizing your harvest. And when I summarize all that, really, as it relates to this, I think we've hit about everything that came in. I know early on, and now just kind of want to close with a couple thoughts that had come out from the field. Luke Davis, or your DSM out by the what I'd call northeast Iowa, he had suggested that as you're out there and you're combining, you're looking out to the field, don't forget about the wet spots that were behind them all year. Until we got dry, they can appear to catch up, but might still be a way off. And as I was having a conversation with one of the folks on the west side of the state, he said that some of the fields looked like go-kart tracks because a lot of it was taken out, but there was still some corn that had to be replanted or crop that was not ready to rock and roll yet. So there's that. And one that came in from Cliff Lane, our regional sales manager out on the Illinois side of the house, he just suggested that, it's a good time to make to make note of things during harvest that you might need to address in the future. So whether you're seeing some weed patches, some washouts, diseases, tile holes, things like that, just a good little refresher to make sure you have that handy there in the cab. I am a big believer of using technology, and there's been some great updates coming out. And I'll tell my phone, hey, remind me at X time to make a list about this or start a list on something. So there's my little IT plug, is to use that technology that we have at our fingertips, whether it's your phone or whether it's all the sensors on the combine there that are telling you that you might have an issue that you need to address. But of course, folks are going to do what's best for the operation. Maybe they need to get out there and beat a storm that's going to come in, and we support that too. So any final thoughts for this podcast, Craig?
I think we've probably wrapped that one up pretty good.
I think we did it for sure. So, well, folks, thanks for joining and listening. Thank you for the questions that came in live as we were recording this. And, please don't forget to check us out on the socials. We've got a TikTok page now, and on Instagram and on X and Facebook as always. Also YouTube. And there's something a little bit different on each one of those to keep it fresh for you. So check us out. You can look us up by just searching Cornelius Seed or at Plant It Profit. Until next time, happy harvest.